What is up, y'all? The long-awaited, long-anticipated gear guide. I am going to show you today what I believe to be the best healing, balance, adapt setup. And if that sounds like a lot for you, I will also go over options for maybe some more tame balance strategies. But this set in particular, I've never gone over, and it is crazy. I never thought I'd be using half these gear items. So let's hop into it. So let's go over exactly what this setup is going to give you. So we are at 12,300 HP, which I would say is pretty good for a balance. Obviously, it's not near their cap, but it's really hard to hit the HP cap while still maintaining good stats elsewhere. And as much as a little extra HP is helpful, I do think that the other stats are more important most of the time. As you can see, we have quite a bit of balance damage. This is 2 over the cap at 170, and being able to do the maximum amount of damage possible really comes into play when you're doing these adapt things where you're spamming lots of hits. You really want to get the maximum value from those hits. The resist is also 1 away from the max, so it's very good, very high, very defensive, which I think is important on a balance to play defensively at times, so that way you can go on the aggro with a lot of HP. The accuracy is where my particular version of this setup can kind of go downhill. It is only 29 accuracy, so that means you can fizzle aura pops if you're running them. And I'm personally not running universal accuracy, so I'm not running storm, I'm running life, which I do think, obviously, for the healing balance is very important, but this setup can be modified to accommodate for storm accuracy as well. The critical rating, I would say, is actually quite high for a balance. 590 is a very decent critical rating for balance. I oftentimes am only running like 450 or maybe like 500 crit. This is actually a very decent amount. And then also with the life disabling pins, you get the life crit, meaning your heals can be for even more. The critical block chance is also quite high. None of your pieces are giving up block, so being able to tank out with the nearly max res and the high amount of block is a huge advantage that a lot of other schools just don't get to have. The armor piercing down here is also insanely high. It is 1 below the stat cap. We are literally either at or 1 below all of the meaningful stat caps right now. And I never thought that that would really be possible, but it is still incredibly good. And we still have 63 outgoing, which is the most outgoing I've ever put on a setup. So your heals actually heal for quite a bit with 2 pieces of gear that give outgoing and the 2 pins. That is an absurd amount of healing. The major drawback with the preferences that I have for this setup is the pip conserve, but I will also go over ways to bump this pip conserve up if you would prefer to play a more mainstream balance with lots of mana burns and things like that. The only other slight downside to this setup is the 97 pip chance, which honestly is still quite good, and I see balances run in with about this amount very regularly. This is not a low amount, but I think personally, to achieve all these other stats with 97 is perfectly adequate. So let's jump into the gear pieces that make this possible. Starting off, we are already going into a hat that I've never reviewed in any of these gear guide videos. It is the Shibalba hat, or also the cute fairy hat from the pack. They are exactly the same, they just have different item cards, and for these setups, both the item cards are irrelevant. This one is a Blade Storm, the other one is like a Moon Blade. It's not really necessary to a balanced setup. But what this does is allow you to get a lot of damage and a healing pin from the hat. The hat that I'm normally running, the Stalker hat, does give a shield pin, but it is a lot less damage and pierce and all that good stuff. Moving on to the robe, unfortunately we are still looking at, this is the meta robe. I don't think this will ever not be the meta robe until they come out with something that is this model, but upgraded. So Hunhao 170, unfortunately, is the best option. However, I have also seen success with the Astute Plot armor. There are a couple drawbacks. Obviously, giving up a life accuracy pin means you give up the ability to run Pigsy and not fizzle it. You can run that risk, or you can just not run Pigsy. I haven't always ran it with this setup, but you do actually get a couple advantages. An extra res is actually really nice, some extra accuracy for your aura pops, some more block. You do give up 1 pip chance, but it's also more HP. The big thing with this is giving up shadow chance and a Hydra item card. I can't stress that enough. An elemental diffuse and a Hydra item card are not the same if you're going for the adapt strategy. Moving on to the boots, I'm actually using the Stalker boots. I do believe these are the only relevant boots that actually give a shield pin. Normally, I'm doing the reverse where I'm running the Stalker hat and the Shabalba boots, but the Shabalba boots actually don't give a shield pin. So I swapped those around. Technically, the stats are a little worse using this configuration, but you get an extra healing pin. So that makes a whole world of difference for this setup. It's just good res, good universal stats. The only thing you give up with these is crit, and obviously compared to Shabalba boots, you give up damage, but you're still getting pip chance with these. So this is the best for what we're doing here. Moving on to the wand. Now here's where the path splits. If you care about the adapt strategy and love the adapt strategy, I cannot stress enough, Cute Fairy Wand is the best. Even over Shabalba, because it gives an adapt item card. This is the only way to get an adapt item card. However, if you value your pip conserve, you plan on doing a lot more mana burns and things like that, it does need to be the Hun Hao sword. There really isn't a good pip conserve alternative that gives shadow rating, so this is really the only wand if you do want the pip conserve. And with this instead, you're actually only giving up 1 damage and 1 pierce, not as it appears to be 3 damage and pierce, because the damage cap for balance is 190. So you're really not giving up that much for running the pip conserve. Honestly, I would argue that the 3 accuracy that you lose is more significant than the 1 damage and pierce at times. Now the Athame is an interesting one, because I did not even realize that there was a healing Athame that still gave you a square socket. This is the Shabalba or the Cute Fairy. In this situation, I have the Cute Fairy. There is literally no difference between them because there's no item cards on these sets. This is absolutely the best of the best. If you need extra accuracy, you can run the Wastelander one. However, giving up 670 HP is a lot for me, but if you really don't want to fizzle those pops and you want to bump up that pip chance, this is the way to go. Now this one might come as a surprise to all of you. I actually think the Cute Fairy necklace is the meta for the adapt strategy. And you might just be like, well, Hun Hao is just more pip conserve and the exact same stats. But this item card means something to me. This Moon Shield is another swappable shield. With all of the things that we have, we end up getting a Moon Shield, an Adapt, a Spirit Shield, and a Hydra. That is 4 cards specifically for the Adapt strategy. When has that ever happened where you get 4 useful item cards from not your pet? So I personally think this is better. If you are running the pip conserve variant, obviously Hun Hao is fine, but Cute Fairy, I genuinely think it's just way better. Now, unfortunately, the ring department gets a little sad because there really is no alternative to the Skyfarer's band. There is only downgrades. So the Skyfarer's band only comes from a pack. There is no other way. You cannot craft it for PvP rewards. You can't farm a gold key. I don't know why. Unless I'm mistaken, there hasn't been something added to be able to farm this, but most of the Skyfarer gear has been kind of phased out, so it's not normally that big of a deal, but unfortunately right now it is that big of a deal. There are a couple of alternatives that you can consider. The Daemonic Ring from the new raid, it's a little less pip chance, and it actually does give universal damage, so that's cool, but it doesn't give HP. 460 is not a small amount of HP to give up. You could also run the Floromancer Ring, or I believe this is the Nullity Ring equivalent. I'm actually not sure. I never really did the first raid. You get a bit more crit chance and you get the same outgoing, but giving up 5 damage is quite a bit. The only true equivalent that I see is the level 160 Hun Hao ring, which I didn't even keep when I got many of them dropped when we used to run this, because I never thought it would be that relevant, and it's really not. It's just a worse version. Again, it's the same damage for 1 less outgoing and 2 less pip chance for a little bit more HP, but this is obviously the closest replacement for the Skyfarer band. But ultimately, I think it's best if you do want to heal to just bite the bullet and open the Skyfarer packs. Moving on to the deck, I think the best deck are the gold key decks. So these can either come from Takanobu in Mushu, or they can come from the golden key boss in Avalon. As you can see, I have both here, and they are literally identical in stats, and they give the exact same item card. Now, I wouldn't recommend this, but if you truly don't care about the pip conserve, there are other options. But giving a Dark Surge item card, once again, it's an amazing item card to have. and there really isn't any other deck that gives something more important than a Dark Surge. On to the mount, the tried and true, the $40, the Clockwork Courser. It's really unfortunate that there's not really stat-giving mounts that are free or even obtainable like through any means that isn't just paying money, but Clockwork Courser is the best, but honestly, this setup can benefit from any of the other ones. The accuracy one could give you enough accuracy to duel into Storm if you use the pins right. The Rock Mount would give you perfect pip chance. Honestly, you could even do the set damage mount and then change the pet around a little bit to give you the exact same balance damage. The only one that's not really worth it is the Battle Narwhal. I would even say that the 2 outgoing mount or 3 outgoing, I honestly don't know. But I would say an outgoing mount would be more worth than this because currently we're at the damage cap anyway. Now the pet is a very simple one. If you're doing the healing stuff, this is the best pet, I would say. The extra Availing Hands, yes, it does give away what you're doing, but it allows you to make your deck in a much more coherent way. But you could also run this with a Beetle with the same stats. Now, everyone is going to play the Adapt setup differently, but I just want to go over the basic reasoning for the spells that I'm packing and the amount that I'm packing them. I'll try to make this part quick and not dilly-dally too much on each spell, but some things do require a bit more leading into. The number one takeaway from this deck making section is that copy and pasting this deck is not necessarily just going to start winning you games in the arena. Things might have to be adjusted, whether it's due to your play style or due to the meta changing. These spells are not always going to be the exact perfect ones to pack. I would say even right now, they're not the exact perfect ones to pack. This is just what's been working for me. So never hesitate. Like, look right, I don't have any Aura Pops in this deck. That might sound absolutely absurd to you. You might want to run Aura Pops. So take this part with a grain of salt, and let's break it down. So starting with the essentials to the Adapt setup, you need 3 things to make the Adapt setup, set up. You need a shield on yourself that is not of the elemental variety, and preferably for this setup, not life either, depending on what school you fight. You need Scorpions to swap over to your opponent to actually trigger things like Hydra and Nova. And then you need the Adapt themselves. So starting at the shield portion of this strategy, you might notice I have a lot of shields in main deck. So I would say about 4 of the 7 schools in the arena, a Spirit Shield is a perfectly adequate first move. Swapping over a Life Shield does not affect you in matchups unless you intend to hit with the Life King art that I'm packing. So this is a great first move. Also, the Moon Shield is the exact same thing, except it swap over a Myth Shield instead, which is even better. These are perfectly great moves against Death, Ice, Storm, and Balance sometimes. However, in matchups where you intend to use the Life King art, or in matchups where they can punish shields, it is a lot better to use a single shield. So I personally am running 5 single shields, 3 to Myth and 2 to Death. In those matchups, obviously you don't want the life shield, so we're running these. I would say there is some merit to maybe getting rid of some of these Spirit Shields for more single shields, so that way you can pull them easier in that matchup, but this has been working for me personally. Moving on to the Scorpions, I would say that 6 is the best amount because you don't want to clog your entire TC bank with them, but if you are consistently trying to go for the Adapt strategy, these are important to pull as soon as possible. 6 seems to be my magic number for being able to pull them exactly when I need them, but them not clogging my TC space too much. And now the Adapts themselves, obviously I'm running 4, and then I'm running the item card. You want to run as many as possible. I would run probably 6 if I could. On to the hits themselves. For the Adapt strategy, I am running 5 Hydras in main deck, plus the item card. If you do not have the item card, I would recommend running 6. These are very important moves. And I would argue in some instances, it might even be better to run 7 in main deck, including the item card. I also run TC Hydras in the event that you are digging for a Scorpion and you are having a lot of trouble pulling it. Your hand ends up being clogged and you end up having to get rid of Hydras from main deck. These can be a substitute. They are less damage though, so try to avoid using these, but they are definitely clutch when necessary. Although I don't tend to use Power Nova as much as Hydra, I'm running 6 of them anyway, For matchups like Fire and Myth, sometimes it's really detrimental to put a shield on yourself, and if you're winning bubble anyway, this is a much stronger move. It doesn't seem like a lot, 600 damage versus 645, but it can make a difference, so I'm running maximum of these, because running any less, I have found that in some matchups, it can really be a struggle. Moving on to the heals, the rebirths are obviously trap counters first, but also incredibly great heals to have. I'm running 3 personally. I haven't ever needed to clear more than 21 traps. When that day comes, unfortunate, but I have reshuffle and things like that. This is obviously still a good heal, but I try not to use this just as a heal because that's kind of just like a stalling tactic. I don't really like that. Unless you have an adapt out, it does trigger adapt, so you can still combo out of it. Pigsy is the best heal per pip that I have, so I do think it's pretty solid to run. Having a second heal dot means it can't be messed with as easily, and it honestly just heals for a ton, but this isn't a super necessary move when you have things like Availing Hands from the pet. I would say that without the pet, it's really hard to run Availing Hands because the main deck version is just weaker. I'm kind of saddened by this, but the item card is just straight up 115 more healing, and the TC is exactly the same, but the main deck is not. So I do think making the pet makes it a lot easier to run a deck with all sorts of crazy things like I am. I'm personally running 3 braces. 4 is probably ideal for most balances, but I cycle very aggressively and I intend on having adapts out and playing very quickly. So these moves are less important to me, but for your average balance, 4 is probably better. Chimera is an incredibly strong move against any school that is overtiming you. If you can even get 1 echo out of this, it is stronger than any other hit that balance has. And this isn't even the max tier version. It could do even more than this. So I am personally running 4 of them. A lot of people are turning to Fire Elf as shield counters, and this move just obliterates them, forces them to dot counter against a balance, but also most of the damage is up front. It's just annoying. You have a 6-round overtime on you, constantly breaking shields. Personally, I think this spell could probably use a rework to where they are bomb OTs that are 6 rounds, so it's actually quite a while before you get the overtime damage, but I also could see them just lowering the initial hit a bit, because balance doesn't typically get this strong of a just base hit. Gearhead is essential in the life matchup, in the myth matchup, in the fire matchup sometimes, death matchup, ice matchup. Gearhead is just an end-all, be-all, counters a third of hanging effects in the game, so it's just an important spell to have since it does exist. So I personally run 3 of them in main deck. This is one of those things that you can put inside. I just personally run them in main because I do a bit more damage here. Mana Burn, a balanced staple. I don't really have to explain to you why these are in here. I personally am only running 4 because my setup is meant to do a lot cooler things than just sit around and Mana Burn. But in balanced dittos, you kind of need a Mana Burn to compete with their Mana Burns. So it's kind of I will be happy when this spell is eventually banned or hopefully nerfed into the ground so it is not so centralizing of the game plan, because honestly I am just as annoyed at getting a balanced wizard as anyone else. As far as shads go, I personally am just running 4 Mockenspiels. I at one point did have some worms in there as well. I don't think Gaze of Fate is really worth it anymore, unfortunately. I do love that spell. It's just not really worth it in this day and age to spend 2 shads on that small amount of damage just for a bubble change. But Mockenspiel is incredibly good, and I just personally can't fit a worm in here at the moment. If I could, I probably would run 1 worm to keep my opponents off guard. Like, it's pretty nice in the balance matchup. They like mana burn away your ability to shad, but in that matchup, most of the time, you're just going to Dark Surge. Personally, I do think 4 Dark Surges would probably be better than the 2 main deck and then the item card, but this deck has been working for me, so I'm trying not to push things too quickly. But Dark Surge is an incredible move for balances, especially when things like Mana Burn exist. The ability to control the game when you have the pip advantage is huge. I'm running some Eye of Vigilant Triton. When people counter your heal overtimes, they get blades for it, and they're very strong blades that can't really be ignored. And I personally think this is the best solution for that. You could also run Enfeebles inside if you wanted to, but as a balance, you kind of just get answers to everything, so I do think this is the best answer for that. As far as bubbles go, obviously I'm running the maximum amount of balance bubbles that I can, but I'm also running 2 Sanks. There's actually an argument to run more Sanks, just so that way you don't get bubbled against. You just always make sure that they don't have their own bubble to attack you. That is a very powerful thing on a balance. If they can't have a constant buff, you do tend to win exchanges. But I found that running 8 bubbles sometimes forced me to start the bubble war, and I just really don't like to do that. I would prefer to just not have a bubble out at all, and not have these clog up my hand. Now, a very fun new addition to this is Sabertooth. Now, I know what you're thinking. Rainbow Serpent is a much stronger answer to heals, and I agree with you. However, this synergizes with Adapt well, and also can really punish people that rebirth, which I feel like Rainbow Serpent struggles to keep up with. But these, you can spam these multiple in a row, so you can just get a lot of value. Even if they only have 2 heal over times from something like a Regenerate or a Pigsy, this is absurd value. 2 heal over times with an Adapt out makes this move free. You actively gain 10 pips and then your pip for the round. This is a free move, and this, once again, is not max tiered. It maxes out at 690. I think this is actually better than Rainbow Serpent for lives. Obviously, against Storms, Rainbow Serpent just completely dunks on them, but you don't always need defenses against a life. You need offense, and the 30 blades can be countered. Sabertooth is just a hit. Moving on to the treasure cards, it's pretty standard stuff. Besides the things that I've talked about already, it's a decent few empowers, some debuffs, and then I'm also running a decent bit of triple shields because it is important to be able to double shield for when people shrike. I also have dispels in here for the same reason, and reshuffle for those longer games that get drawn out. The only majorly weird thing you might notice in here is King Artorias is the only reason I'm running the life damage on top of the crit for healing. This is the best OT counter that I could come up with for this setup, because Earthwalker is just never really going to do that kind of damage unless you're running the Pierce pins as well, and even then it's just a very weak spell and you need an overtime counter. But this allows you to heal, and guess what? This also triggers Adapt. So it all just works in perfect harmony to where most things in this deck either trigger Adapt on the initial hit, or the things that they react to, like with Chimera. Oftentimes you're Chimeraing after a person Elephants, or after a person Stone Colossuses. So that will trigger the Adapt, and the hit may not, but almost everything in this deck is either things that can react to things that trigger to Adapt, or trigger the Adapt themselves. So this setup has been doing crazy things for me, and I hope you guys find some success with it as well, doing something a bit more entertaining than just Pathé scale spamming and mana burning. That's gonna do it for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys found this educational, and let me know if you have any ideas for maybe things that I could change, maybe additions to the strategy, or maybe some things that could just be mixed around in general. I'm always open to trying new things, so if there's a strategy that you'd like to see me try, go ahead and join the Discord, give me some suggestions. Thank you all so much. Later, taters.